Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Leadership Lounge with Marlowe Foster. Joining us again today for the second part of his two-part interview is Raymond Pierce. Raymond Pierce is president of the Southern Education Foundation based in Atlanta, Georgia. Last week, the Leadership Lounge focused on Raymond's early career, focusing on educational equality and service in the Clinton administration. This week, we will focus on the Southern Education Foundation and the types of activities this foundation is undertaking. As we noted last week, the Southern Education Foundation focuses on low-income students and students of color and educational achievement in the South. Before we begin the second part of our interview with Raymond, one programming note: the Southern Education Foundation will be hosting a forum in Little Rock, Arkansas on November 13th through the 15th. The forum is entitled The Politics of Equity, Navigating a Path for Public Education. It will be held at the William Jefferson Clinton Presidential Library. You can click on southern-education.org and the Forums tab to learn about this exciting event. And now, part two of our interview with Raymond Pierce, president of the Southern Education Foundation. For our listeners, why don't you start us with a little bit of background around the Southern Education Foundation and then the types of things you're focused on as its leader?
Well, the Southern Education Foundation, it was historically kind of operated behind the scenes. We are the oldest education foundation in the South, one of the oldest education foundations in the nation. We are 150 years old. The Southern Education Foundation began in 1867, a couple of years after the end of the Civil War, and it has its origins with George Peabody. George Peabody at that time considered the wealthiest man, if not one of the wealthiest men in the country, definitely not the wealthiest man, but one of the wealthiest men in the country at that time, and I think Mr. Peabody was a British citizen, but he made his money here in the States, I believe in the insurance world back in Philadelphia. Well, he toured the South after the Civil War and saw the destruction and noticed that the Reconstruction effort was largely focused on getting the economy up and running again, getting the agrarian society and running again and getting these cotton mills up and running to basically pay for the war. But there was little to no attention being focused on this newly emancipated population, these masses of people here, these African Americans, now black folks who are now free, and ultimately with the coming of the 14th Amendment, now citizens, yet not literate and not educated. And George Peabody felt, look, the way to bring them into the society is to get them educated. So he put up $1 million in 1867. I mean, that was a lot of money.
That's right.
He put up $1 million for the purpose of educating the freedmen, coloreds in the South. And he started by training teachers, money to go to, identify coloreds at that time who could teach, and then getting school buildings built, back then one-room shacks throughout the South, Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, all the way up to Maryland. And then a year later, John Slater, who was also an exceptionally wealthy man in New York City, made his money in the textile business up in Connecticut, I believe. He put up $1 million. He said, look what George is doing. This is, we got to do something, this population of folks here in the South. And so he put up $1 million and to create the Slater Fund to pretty much do what the Peabody Fund was doing, and build more schools, hire more, train more teachers, and he actually used a lot of his money to actually push for legislation in the General Assemblies of the South to public funding, not just for blacks, but also poor whites, because there really wasn't much of a public school system to begin with. There was some in the South and a lot of more private education, but just about everything was destroyed with that war. And so he put up $1 million also with the focus on getting people educated in the South. Shortly thereafter, Anna Jeans, who was considered one of the wealthiest women in the United States. Interestingly, she was actually Amish, out of
Okay.
Pennsylvania. Yeah, she made a lot of money also in the, I think, I forgot how she made. I think also in the textile industry. But she had two pet interests, pet peeves, and one was healthcare, the other was education. And she put up $1 million to create the Jeans Fund, the Jeans teacher, named after her. And they were creating legions of African American women out there, training them to be teachers. Interestingly, one of the most famous was a woman by the name of Virginia Randolph. And I was talking to my aunt, my wife's aunt, who just passed away last week, and she was a teacher in the Richmond, Virginia public schools. And she told me, she said, "Oh, Raymond, Virginia Randolph, she was like our leader. You know, people knew about her, even though they never met her. She was like, you know, the queen of black education in the early part of the 1900s and going into the 1930s. And there are a number of schools to this day still named after her, the Virginia Randolph schools. So this is what was going on, trying to create an infrastructure of education for blacks in the South. Sometime after the turn of the century, 1913, somewhere around there. Also, the Rockefellers put up some money too. But somewhere around 1913, all of these funds were consolidated into one fund called the Southern Education Foundation. And they brought former U.S. President Rutherford B. Hayes was on the board.
Okay.
And in fact, the Southern Education Foundation in its history has had 6 former U.S. presidents serve on the board, including Ulysses S. Grant at one time. But the first African American placed on the board was Booker T. Washington. Yes, he served on the board of the Southern Education Foundation, and then the Southern Education Foundation started getting into leadership development. You've got these schools, you got these teachers, you're teaching, but now the thought was, look, we need to start getting these people of color trained to manage these schools. How do you assign teachers to the classroom? What's going to be the curriculum? When you got to order the books, what's the school year going to look like? That management. And so principals, superintendent, that kind of thing. So they developed this program of this focus on education leadership and a fellowship so they get trained people who are graduating from college, and we'll put them in this fellowship program. Interestingly, one of the first persons to come through that fellowship program was W.E.B. Du Bois. And what's so interesting about that, you got Booker T. Washington on the board and W.E.B. Du Bois coming through the program, and if you know your history, those guys had some.
Right, that's right. They had a little philosophical difference.
They had some philosophical differences, all here at the Southern Education Foundation. I mean, go figure. But and then as time went by, the foundation started getting into research. And to doing empirical research to support improvements in the public education for African Americans, but also to support research in support of desegregating the nation's the state systems of public education. I think it was the Ford Foundation in the early 50s put up $100,000, put out an RFP for $100,000 to universities to do some research on this. No university would pick it up. And so it came here to the Southern Education Foundation. And that is a lot of the research that was used, to my understanding, to support Thurgood Marshall and those guys and Jack Greenberg in their prosecution and litigation of the Brown versus Board of Education case. So that really launched the Southern Education Foundation into this and having this vaunted, well-respected research operation, something that we're bringing back here at the Southern Education Foundation. I could talk a little bit about that later. But fast forward, over the years, we have been the beneficiary of some pretty significant grants for educational programming from good people at the Gates Foundation, the Kellogg Foundation, Atlanta Philanthropies, Carnegie, Ford. So Southern Education Foundation has done well, and those grants have caused us to focus on areas of racial equity in K-12 and higher ed. and building grassroots capability on the ground to advocate for racial equity in education. I came on board in January, Marlowe, and I told the board that if I came here, I would do a number of things. But one was, I would, within a year, have the Southern Education Foundation's positions in terms of policy positions on some of the most contentious issues in public education today, that we would clarify our positions on these issues like school reform, school choice, and the elements of that continue to make their way through various general assemblies throughout the country, and definitely here in the South, like charter schools, vouchers, tax credits, also school governance, the takeover of public school districts. Southern Education Foundation, definitely, we do not oppose taking over a school district or state coming in and taking over a school district that's failing students, but there got to be some parameters around that, because there are some byproducts of that in terms of the destabilizing representative political structures in these towns when you take over these school districts. So we're going to clarify our policy on that, and also on school funding. How are we paying for these schools? How are we paying our teachers? So those issues are going to be clarified before the end of this year, and once we have our positions and guidelines on that, our intention is to go into 2019 and push those policies in the various legislatures in the South. The moment some state senator or some state representative introduces some legislation that affects education, we're going to know about it, and we're going to respond, and we're going to say, dear Senator such and such, I understand you presented this legislation. We've got some concerns, and here are those concerns. Here's the research to back it, and we'd love to talk to you. And of course, the person may tell us to get lost, but that's why it's so helpful that the Southern Education Foundation has these grassroots organizations on the ground that we can then inform as to what's going on, and have them engage the political processes for modifying that legislation. We also intend to draft model legislation with a more equity focus to it. So that's the legislative initiative that we are launching. It's all going to come after our issues forum that we're having in Little Rock, Arkansas in November. And I could talk to you a little bit more about that, but I know I've been running off of the mouth, Marlowe. Let me pause for a second, see if you, did I answer your question, or did you take me in another direction?
No, everything's perfect. So Raymond, that's really interesting, and thank you for sharing with us the information on the forum that you're going to have in Little Rock, Arkansas. Lots of times when you're talking about hot button issues, critical issues, things like education reform, charter schools, there's a lot of discussion out there, but not a tremendous amount of opportunity for public feedback. Can you talk to us a little bit more about your forum, how it's going to be structured, and how the average citizen may be able to get involved?
Well, the forum is in significant part structured around academic discourse, and primarily between two academies or universities. We have the Department of Education Reform at the University of Arkansas, which is a fairly conservative leaning think tank, I'll call it that, which was funded in significant part in their inception by the Walton Foundation, which is largely considered the academics that perform research in support of choice and school reform and vouchers and charter schools and tax credits and the like. Significant group of scholars at that department. And then on the left, so to say, if I can say that, you've got the Vanderbilt University Peabody College of Education. Yes, you named after the same guy who helped fund the Southern Education Foundation. The Peabody College of Education and Human Development at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, which is largely considered a very equity-focused collection of scholars and researchers who will appear on panels with the folks from the University of Arkansas's Department of Education Reform and present, discuss, and debate these issues on charter schools, vouchers, and so forth and so on. We're actually bringing in Andre Perry, also from the Brookings Institute, sharp African American man out of New Orleans, down your way, Mark.
Okay.
Who actually ran 2 charter schools down there, but then went up to the Brookings Institute and continues to do some significant research on the effects of charter schools in public education. So we've got him also coming in, and we may have one other person from outside Vanderbilt or the University of Arkansas. But for the most part, those are the scholars. Again, it's one thing to be able to sit on a panel and speak your opinion, but it's another thing to sit on a panel and speak your opinion and you've actually done some research and you've observed this. And you've got some published scholarship on this, which is what we want, because we're using this to inform our policy positions. There's a 4th panel too, and that's on the practitioners panel. So that's superintendents bringing in the Sharon Griffith, who runs the turnaround school district in Tennessee, out of Memphis. Who's highly regarded in what she's been able to accomplish there. She's coming in also to sit on a panel along with with 2 other school superintendents, and I believe a state senator from Arkansas. But we're bringing in people from all around that region, from Oklahoma, Louisiana, Tennessee, and Arkansas, of course. Now, these sessions are all highlighted by questions and answer Q&A from the audience. Because we want not only for these people to challenge each other's scholarship and each other's research, but we want parents and educators and community folks who are being invited to attend the conference to be in attendance and step up to the microphone and present their questions and make their statements. We're also having a series of roundtable discussions over the 2.5-day period of this issues forum. Specifically for grassroots organizations and community people, communities folks, to come together and discuss these issues in terms of what's best for the education of our children within this current state. So we feel pretty comfortable that we're going to get a significant input from the community, but also from academics and researchers. Also, there's a reception Tuesday night where we're honoring the Little Rock 9, those 9 black children that desegregated Little Rock Central High back in 1959, again, under the armed guard of federal marshals. Ernie Green, probably one of the most famous names in that group, who I know, consider a friend. He and the 8 others will hopefully be there on that Tuesday afternoon before the program kicks off on Wednesday morning. We're on at that reception on Tuesday. We'll have a conversation with them and let them talk about their experience and how it relates to today, and ensuring that there's equity in public education for all of our children.
So, Raymond, you have had an amazing career up to this point, and what I would consider a blessed life up to this point. I mean, when you think about the Southern Education Foundation and your legacy there, what do you think about most? What do you want your mark on the foundation to be?
Well, thank you, Marlowe. I do feel blessed, and I put that in perspective the older I get. I'm 59 years old now. When I turned 57, for some reason I decided to go back and get a master's degree. So I'm actually working on a master's over at Duke Divinity School. I'm not trying to go into the clergy or anything, but I just wanted to have that deeper understanding and be able to not just think legally and economically and politically, but also think theologically about some of these issues. But I mentioned that because of, when you said I've had a blessed career, and so I look at it that way. I'm learning to look at it that way, and in terms of a larger picture, in terms of the future, and what do you leave behind in this world? I mean, how did you make life better, before you left? So I look, after you left. So I am fortunate. I am blessed to be in this position. So I would like to be able to say that, Not only did I strengthen the Southern Education Foundation, of course, by, increasing the endowment, which, of course, any person that comes in my position should do, and I feel pretty confident we'll be able to add to the endowment of the foundation so that it can continue long after I'm gone to do the work that it's been doing for 150 years. But also that people will be able to say, the Southern Education Foundation, they stepped to the plate and they brought some civil discourse to this contentious debate going back and forth on school reform. There's too much of that politicizing and demonizing of positions that are supposed to be about what's best for our children, our young people, so they can, with public funds, be prepared to enter our society, profitably and gain gainful employment, or go on and get higher education and be good citizens and contribute to the greater good and the greater community. Well, if we get bogged down in terms of our ability to do that at our best because we're arguing over issues that we shouldn't be arguing about, I'd like to be able to say that the Southern Education Foundation brought some clarity to that and brought, people together on some common ground so they could advance a common understanding and agreement on how to educate our children. So that's one, that's what I'd like to be able to say I did. I leave the Southern Education Foundation in a better position than I found it, and have it be said that, during my time, the Southern Education Foundation waded into this, this pool of controversy on public education, settled the waters a little bit, and allow for policymakers and leaders to move forward in an area that was best for our students.
Well, Raymond, I really appreciate you being on the Spot today. As you alluded to in the beginning, we know each other very well. I do consider you a dear friend, but quite frankly, I've learned so much more about you today than I ever knew. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing with us. And hopefully we can have you back on the show one day in the future.
I appreciate that, Marlowe. Next time I see you, man, I might have a good cigar for you, my friend.
Thanks so much.